Good afternoon, and welcome to our dialogue about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging webinar. My name is Cynthia Robinson Smith. I am a proud National Women's History Alliance board member and Black Women's History Committee founding member. Our 2024 theme is honoring women who advocate for equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Additionally, I'm an active Diversity Council alumnus of the AmWins Group Benefits Division. In 2020, our organization began our Diversity and Inclusion Council. In response to the George Floyd murder, we held our first roundtable discussions for Black and Brown African American employees. It was for us, by us. We were encouraged to have our say without a fear of negative reprisals. We had 1,500 employees in attendance. Our company also offered non-Black employees the opportunity to attend roundtable discussions as well. I had concerns that my oldest daughter would not be able to find full-time employment because of her participation in a protest march and an interview by a newspaper. I'm grateful to say that this was not the case. In 2020, I applied for membership in the D&I Council, and my application was accepted for the year 2021. It's important for me to be a part of a cause that is bigger than myself. The seeds that I am planting for trees today are not for me to enjoy the shade from them. It is for the next generation. Sharita Hardy. The council has been an equalizer for me with no big I's or little U's. Everyone is treated with the utmost respect. We are made to feel seen, heard, and valued, which is very empowering. I've also experienced a sense of belonging. There have been times in my profession where I have not felt this way due to my station in life. Membership in the council has helped me to become bolder and more confident. I approach each day with a renewed sense of adventure as I enlist the help of colleagues across our organization to mutually provide wonderful customer experiences. I would like to introduce our Mistress of Ceremonies for today, Reverend Vivica Keyes. Reverend Keyes is the first female minister in her church's 100-year history. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Vivica Keyes. Vivica?
So I'm excited to hear from this illustrious list of people that we have speaking today. We have some phenomenal women who are well equipped to be able to speak and enlighten us a bit, if you will, in so many different facets of how this plagues us and how we can unite together to overcome some of these things. So I do believe that it is an important conversation, not just to talk about it, but to endeavor to share resources, to share experiences and wisdom and knowledge on how to create solutions for each of these things. So the women, as I said in this program, are well equipped to be able to do that. So I am not going to belabor and talk much here because I'm excited to be able to jump right in and to hear from these incredible women. So with that being said, we want to begin today's program by introducing the Interim Executive Director of this Women's History Alliance. So please help me to welcome Jill Zinckgraf, who everybody refers to lovingly as Ms. JZ. Jill.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you. That was so beautiful. And so hello, everyone, and happy Saturday. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. And as the Interim Executive Director of the National Women's History Alliance, I am so honored to stand before you today to recognize the profound significance of Black History Month and the invaluable contributions of Black women to our shared history. Black History Month is a time for us to celebrate the achievements, resilience, and the enduring legacy of Black Americans throughout history. It is a time to honor the leaders, activists, artists, scholars, and everyday heroes and sheroes who have shaped our nation and advanced the cause of equity, equality, and justice. At the National Women's History Alliance, our mission is to honor and celebrate the diverse experiences and achievements of women from all backgrounds. We understand that the struggle for women's rights is deeply intertwined with the struggle for racial justice. Women of color, particularly Black women, have been at the forefront of movements for social change, often leading with courage, resilience, and unwavering determination. And so as we celebrate Black History Month, it's essential to recognize and honor the countless Black women who have paved the way for progress, shattered barriers, and inspired generations to come. From the iconic women like Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, to Rosa Parks and Maya Angelou, to the women who will stand before you here today, Black women have left an indelible mark on our society, challenging injustice and championing the rights of all people. Today, as we reflect on those legacies of these remarkable women, let us recommit ourselves to the ongoing struggle for equality, equity, and justice. Let us amplify the voices of Black women, uplift their stories, stay curious, and ensure that their contributions are acknowledged and celebrated in our schools, communities, and institutions. By engaging in these dialogues about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, we not only honor their legacy, but also ensure that their voices are heard, their experiences are valued, and it's through these conversations that we deepen our understanding, foster empathy, and work towards a more equitable and inclusive world. At the National Women's History Alliance, we are dedicated to honoring and preserving the rich tapestry of women's history. We believe that Black history is women's history, and that women's history is Black history. And so together, let us continue to honor and celebrate the extraordinary contributions of Black women to that shared heritage. And so now it is my very distinct pleasure to introduce an esteemed board member, Rosita Stevens-Holsey. Rosita is the co-author of the award-winning biography, Pauli Murray, The Life of a Pioneering Feminist and Civil Rights Activist. Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray was a writer, activist, attorney, and Episcopal priest, rendering her life and legacy stronger and more relevant. And just as importantly, she was Rosita's aunt. And throughout her life, Murray fought for the oppressed, not only through changing laws, but by using her powerful prose to influence those who could affect change. Rosita is a contributor, supporter, and a board member of the Pauli Murray Center for History and Social Justice in Durham, North Carolina. And as a member of the National Women's History Alliance Board, she is a founding member of the Black Women's History Committee of the National Women's History Alliance, who sponsored today's program. Rosita is in a uniquely positioned to share with us the profound impact of her aunt's remarkable life and work. I could spend quite a while discussing Rosita's remarkable journey, but for now, without further delay, I'm honored to turn the program to Rosita as she presents the inspiring narrative of her Aunt Pauli.
Thank you, Jill. Pauli Murray was a transformational civil rights activist born in Baltimore and raised in Durham, North Carolina. Though most people have never heard of her, against all odds, she managed with her intellect, tenacity, grit, and determination to become a poet, writer, author, a lawyer, and legal theorist, a professor, and lastly in her life, an Episcopal priest. She was a freedom rider before they were called freedom riders, having been jailed in Virginia in 1940 for sitting in the whites-only section of a segregated bus. Pauli Murray graduated from high school at 15 and moved to New York City to attend Hunter College, where she received her BA in English Literature in 1933. She applied to an all-white University of North Carolina in 1938, but was rejected because of her race. This case promotes a national debate, and she gained a friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt. Aunt Pauli was enrolled in the Howard University Law Program, where she was the only woman in her class. While there, she wrote a paper that Thurgood Marshall would later use to successfully argue Brown versus the Board of Education. Pauli graduated at the top of her class in 1944. She was the only woman in her class, and she was awarded the prestigious fellowship at Harvard, But after the award was announced, Harvard Law School rejected her because of her gender. She later earned a master's in law at the University of California, Berkeley, and in 1965 became the first African American to receive a doctorate in law from Yale Law School. Aunt Pauli wrote a book in 1950, State Laws of Race and Color. Thurgood Marshall considered that the Bible of the civil rights attorneys. It exposed the extent and absurdity of segregation and was called the Bible of the Civil Rights Movement. In 1966, Murray joined Betty Friedan and others to form the National Association for Women, but later relinquished a leading role, believing that issues of Black and working class women were not being adequately addressed by the organization. In 1977, she became the first Black woman to be ordained an Episcopal priest. Her treatise on women's rights, called Jane Crow, served as a constant inspiration for Ruth Bader Ginsburg while she was on the bench. My aunt was unapologetically Black. Her Southern upbringing and her exposure to Jim Crow helped shape her identity. She spent her whole life fighting for justice. She lived by principle and truly believed in human rights for all, no matter the outside appearance, the cultural background, religion, race, or financial status. She acted without fear, publicity, or financial gain. She didn't let rejection set her back. She actually thrived on people telling her she couldn't do something, and she always accomplished it. Could being born ahead of her time refer to her almost prophetic knowledge of what needed to be done to include and treat all citizens in this country with the same respect in terms of equity and civil, economic, and human rights? She often spoke the truth, whether it was ever heard before. As I mentioned before, she never gave up on her goals. She persevered always. She never sought recognition for the many things that she accomplished. Aunt Pauli was a trailblazer for women's rights, civil rights, LGBTQ plus rights, and most of all, human rights. This January 2nd, she became the 11th woman to be commensurated on a U.S. Mint quarter. I hope you will come to owning one of those in your lifetime. I am very proud to call her my aunt and very proud to serve as the matriarch of the Fitzgerald Murray family. If you want to find out any more information about Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray, please check our website out at Preserving Pauli Murray. And I hope to see you soon. Don't forget to try to find one of those quarters.
Wow, what an incredible history and such a phenomenal woman. There's probably many people on this chat that are not familiar with her. And I see that, I'm hoping you guys can hear me because it seems like the screen is frozen. So that is a wonderful tribute to a fantastic woman. If you have questions, I want you to encourage you all in the chat to make sure that you keep your questions coming. And at the end of this session, we are going to be able to address some of those questions. You're going to hear from some phenomenal women as we go forward. So make your notes and send your questions in now, and we'll make sure that we get to answer them towards the end. Again, what a wonderful tribute. by a phenomenal woman to another phenomenal woman. So we're going to keep going. We actually have another tribute coming up right now, and this time it's going to be a video from Amara Smith. She is a college student, and she's a women's basketball coach, and she's going to offer a tribute to Coach Vivian Stringer. So we can let that video play now.
My name is Amara Smith. There are many Black women trailblazers that have paved the way for us to come behind them. Today I want to talk about Coach C. Vivian Stringer, a trailblazer in the sports world in women's college basketball. Throughout her life, she has had to overcome adversity as a Black woman and as a Black female coach. Charlene Vivian Stringer was born March 16, 1948, in Edenborn, Pennsylvania. Vivian Stringer started coaching at a very young age. As a child playing football with the boys, she dreamed up plays. Vivian tried out for the high school cheerleading squad because there was no other sport designated for girls. Vivian did not make the team, but gained her rightful place by taking this matter up with the school board. She was only the second Black girl to make the squad. During the boys' basketball games, she would critique the boys on their play and give them tips as she would cheer. Since Vivian Stringer was not chosen originally for the cheerleading squad, she felt like she was less than or inferior. From then on, she made it her mission to make sure nobody else ever felt that way. Vivian wanted every woman to know their worth and to feel included. Coaching women's basketball gave her the platform to do so. Stringer began coaching at Cheney State. The school did not have much money, and so she volunteered. There were no divisions in women's basketball at that time. Schools just played whatever team matched their level of play. In 1982, Cheney State made it to the championship game. Vivian attributes their success to the girls' desire to be the best. This was the first time a historically Black college or university made it to the NCAA championship game. Coach Stringer is still the only coach to make that happen. Shortly afterwards, an offer to coach at the University of Iowa came along. Vivian's daughter, Nina, had recently been stricken with meningitis, and it was determined that she would never walk or talk again. Iowa had the largest teaching hospital in the country, which could help her family with Nina's medical needs. She met with the head of developmental disabilities, and he promised to take care of her family. Vivian took the University of Iowa to the NCAA Final Four in 1993. She loved coaching at Iowa, but her husband Bill died, and life without him became extremely difficult for her. Vivian felt that her family needed a new start. She always told her girls that you don't make excuses in life. You deal with the cards that have been given to you. Coach Stringer signed a contract to work with the women's program at Rutgers University, sight unseen. In 2000, Vivian Stringer took Rutgers to the NCAA Final Four. In 2007, Rutgers went on to play for the national championship. After that game, a radio host named Don Imus made some nasty, racist, and sexist comments about Coach Stringer's team. At that moment, Vivian gathered her team and told them they had nothing to be ashamed of and that they were not alone. She decided to stand up for her girls, but this did end up hurting her program. Coach Stringer insisted that Don Imus apologize to them face to face. Coach Stringer retired after 50 years of coaching in 2022. She had 1,055 career wins, 28 NCAA tournament appearances, and 4 NCAA Final Four appearances. She is the first coach to take 3 different universities to the Final Four. Coach Stringer was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, as well as the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. I too aspire to be a college basketball coach. I'm hoping that I can achieve great things and lead an exemplary career just like she did. Most importantly, I want to carry on her mission to make sure that nobody else feels inferior to anyone else. Coach Vivian Stringer was ahead of her time. If you want to learn more about her, you can read her book, Standing Tall. Thank you.
Yet again, we hear about another story from a powerful woman. I love being a part of this collective body of work that you all have put together. I'm just the moderator, so I am just so honored to be able to hear these stories of these women and their incredible contributions. And we have another one coming up. She is actually one of the board members here, and she is the chaplain and diversity officer at the Brooks School in Massachusetts. Here to share her experiences working on issues at a prominent prep school and international work for women, please welcome Reverend Terri Ofori. Reverend Terri, are you out there? Let me see.
I am, but
there
it
you
just
go.
says my video has stopped, so I don't know why, but I am here. So,
Okay.
Yeah. So, thank you. I'm honored to be a part of the National Women's History Alliance Board and also a member of the Black Women's Committee. And I'm excited about that. And so today I'd like to talk to you about diversity, equity, inclusion in the educational landscape, and then tie it to womanist theology and ethics and pedagogy. And so one of the things that I start out with DEIB is noting that while it is an acronym, it is 4 parts of a whole. And so a number of times people look at DEIB and think it's kind of one thing, but it isn't. So it stands for, the acronym stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so diversity has to do with representation of people. Inclusion has to do with making sure that people have access to, it looks like my video is now working. Thank you, whoever did that. And then it has to do with the inclusion piece, has to do with sort of making sure that representation, once it's at the table, is in fact allowed to bring contribution to that table. And then when we look at equity, that mostly has to do with access. And belonging is the outcome of all 3 of those things working together, where people feel. So it kind of moves out of the head space into the heart space in terms of how people feel that they belong. And so when diversity, equity, and inclusion is working well, you should have an outcome of belonging. And so one of the things that I think is so important during this time, as our nation is particularly divided, that we focus on how to have conversations around these topics. And if you've been watching the news, you would note that there are a number of initiatives in some states to ban DEI. And so I think that there is a lot of misperception about what that is. And I do think it's important to note that there are different approaches to people that work in DEI. If you'll notice, some places would have, say, justice at the end, which would be a DEIJ, or they'll have belonging, DEIB. And there are some other acronyms that people have. And so I think they all share the need for justice. and truth telling, and making people feel belonging. But as we know, with anything that requires people to change their mind and their hearts, that is a process and a work that requires deep digging, truth telling, and addressing things that are not true. And so that's hard in a normal conversation, but when you bring organizations and people together, that can be quite difficult to do. So in the educational space, a number of times people can see the IB work as correcting misinformation, which is true. And so sometimes people are pretty much on guard or somewhat defensive at times. And so the approach with DEIB is so important in establishing psychological safety for those who are new to this, and also for the people that have to speak truth to power. And so one of the things that I like to focus on in my DEIB work is the area of the heart, meaning making sure that people feel that they belong before we engage in the other aspects of the acronym. And so belonging is generally considered an outcome. But I actually like to start with belonging and build relationships with people, because as we all know in normal life, when people come up to us that we don't know and try to get us to change, we don't generally accept that. And so one of the things I think that is important is highlighting relationship building, so that when we build that relationship, we have safety with those people and they have safety with us and are able to then be more vulnerable with us. And so that's one of the things that I think is not happening in some places. And it's not because perhaps the person who's leading that work isn't doing it, but sometimes it's misunderstanding. And so, as you noted, I am also a chaplain. So chaplains generally tend to deal with people who are experiencing difficult times and things of that nature. And so you wonder, how do these two things come together? Well, in fact, if you look at our history of civil rights, almost all of the people involved in the civil rights movement were reverends and religious individuals. They weren't only Christian. We had Rabbi Joshua Heschel, who was Jewish. We had some Orthodox priests, and I do believe that there were some Muslims involved in that movement. And so what we see here is that people that are focused on healing were involved in this movement, because if we take all of the hard truths and give them to people without people being able to receive them, then it doesn't often go well. And so you think about somebody like the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray, but who was an advocate, for gender injustice issues, for civil rights, for racial issues. She actually is also a reverend. We looked at Harriet Tubman. She was very guided by her faith, Sojourner Truth. And so for me, I do see that these things are kind of inextricably linked. If we look at Bishop Tutu, who was very prominent in the movement, Truth and Reconciliation movement in South Africa, he also saw this work as an opportunity to heal. And so to bring this to womanist theology centers the voices and experiences of Black women. And a number of our Black women historically have been guided by a deep faith, whatever that faith may have been. And so that theology is branched out in ethics, and now some people focus on pedagogy, how you teach. And so one of the things that we do with that work is we notice that when we focus on our oppression, we're also saying that we understand others who are oppressed. And so for me, I'd like to end on, yes, one of the things that I love about womanist theology, and in particular Black women, is that we are able to recognize our oppression, but yet we fight for others who are oppressed. And so I think that's what DEIB work should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, these women have such insight. And as you can see, when we talk about this topic, it's such a broad topic and it impacts so many people in so many different ways that we could probably talk about this all day, depending on each person having a different perspective. So I again want to just encourage you to remember the people who have spoken before we go to this next segment, because you're going to be able to ask questions, or you can put them in the chat right now and be able to ask questions. I'm sure that some of you might want to know more about Dr. Pauli, or even about our former person, our Jill. She had some incredible insight. And then our last speaker, Reverend Terri, who also had some great contributions. So if you have questions, make sure you hold those. At this time, I want to go forward in this, and we're going to just dig a little bit deeper, and we're going to have a conversation with someone who is our special guest for today. She is an executive. She has such an extensive resume that I had a hard time trying to figure out how to even introduce her. And part of her resume includes she's had such an extensive background of working in conditions to make healthcare reputable and equitable and fair in the industry. She is the Human Resource Executive and Diversity and Inclusion Thought Leader at Providence Health Plan, in driving Providence Health Plan's commitment to advancing true population health. Her name is Timshel Tarbet, and she ensures health equity is integrated into all facets of the enterprise and strategy. So at this time,
Reverend
if you would join me.
I apologize for cutting in, but we've forgotten one of our speakers, Arthurenia Hawkins, is supposed to go at this time. And then after her, we will be introducing Timshel Tarbet. Thank you so much. I know this is such an exciting time. It's hard to keep track of everything.
Oh, okay. So let me back up. Up here, and let me pull her information up. Just one second. Okay, we do. She is the Intergenerational Inclusion on the Equity and Diversity Committee at the Denver Museum. Forgive me for bypassing her. You are right. She is our next guest, and her name is none other than Arthurenia Hawkins. Arthurenia, forgive me for bypassing you here. Let me introduce you and let you have your moment.
I hope everybody can hear me. Everyone, it's a pleasure to be here today. And like I said, I just thank you for having me in your space. I will not take long. I know we might be running over time, but I spent 3 years with the Denver Art Museum as on their equity committee, and we did racial equity for 3 years. After 3 years, I have switched over down to what we have a strategic planning committee, and we're now looking at what we call intergenerational equity. And it's been exciting for me. So I can tell you about what we're looking at is that when we have intergenerational equity, we want to be able to pass it down as people of color and women, so each generation understands what has gone before. So really quickly, I'm going to tell you about different generations, and each generation, I'm a baby boomer, and it goes from like 1946 to 1980. Generation X is 1965 to 1980. Some of you might understand which generation you're in right now. Millennials, 1981 to 1996. Generation Z, and I work with a lot of Generation Zs at the Denver Art Museum. That is 1997 to 2012. But I'm here to tell you about the generation that's coming in as strong. It's called the Generation Alpha. These young students are born from 2013 to 2025. So a little bit about what's happening in Generation Alpha. Please realize that they see everybody to want to be treated fairly. They're innovative in what they're seeing and doing. We're seeing that this generation is going to be more self-directed than any previous one. And they are also environmentally conscious. They want to pass down all the things that they see right now that's coming up. what is exciting to me about Generation Alpha, the racial makeup is 26% Latino, 16% Black, and 7% Asian Pacific Islander. So we were looking at all the different things. They still want to do reducing income inequality. They want to address poverty, and they want to empower the marginalized. But we did find out doing some of our research, example of intergenerational equity, we don't know how to quite talk to each other. So here's an example, and like I said, I'll be brief. Their communication is different than we are. If you're in the baby boomers, even Generation X, we tend to like face-to-face. We like phone calls and we like meetings. Generation Alpha, they do not like that. They will like messaging apps. They are not that formal on their communication. But we do know that we were trying to look at it with what they call the 3 R's: respect, resiliency, I heard it before, responsibility and reciprocity. So really quickly, that's what's coming on with intergenerational equity. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, we certainly didn't want to miss that information. So Arthurenia, I just want to say thank you for reminding us that this is multifaceted, and connect the dots that although the panel seems to be of a similar age bracket, but we still have to remember that there's a whole generation before us and behind us, a couple of generations probably behind us, that we need to include in this conversation. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront of our attention today.
Okay, thank you so much.
So thank you. And so now I will go back to where I previously left off. I kind of gave her such an introduction, but I'm going to reintroduce her just a little bit because we're going to have a more in-depth conversation and you'll learn more about this incredible woman. She has been in the trenches for a long time with these conditions in her role at different facets. Her history, like I said, when I read her resume, I was just trying to extract just a few things to say about her. The one thing about a great introduction, I said this earlier to the ladies before we went live, is sometimes when people list all of the things that you've done, you wonder sometimes who are they talking about, because you don't even realize yourself how much you've contributed. And this person is definitely honoring in that same line. So I want to bring her in with us right now. And her name is Miss Timshel Tarbet. Timshel, join us. Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
I know here that you are a lot of different things. And I see that some of the titles that it brings up when I look at how it's introducing you, when I was reading about you, it said thought leader, change agent, transformation specialist. So that's just what some of the nouns that are given to you by the business world. I want you to tell us a little bit about who you are from your own perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about all of those are terms that people might use to explain who I am. But I think deep down, what I would say is I'm a person. If I was to explain myself, I would say that I'm a person that wants to use my strength and my voice to help others. I really, really, really believe in even from my earliest time. I mean, growing up, I spent a lot of my time with. We had a family farm, so I was with the animals. I wanted to care for those that needed to be cared for. So any given time, you'd see me walking around with bummer lambs following me because they'd think I was their mom or something like that. And that is really just transitioned through my life. I want to do good. I want to help. And so that would be how I would describe myself, as somebody who's trying to leave this world a better place than I came into it.
And so I see that you have a history that dates back over 20 years. Can you tell me what initiated your interest in this particular topic of equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging? What was your initial interest? What sparked you? Did something happen, or was there just a general curiosity? How did it all start for you?
I'm glad that you said that from a work standpoint, because I was like, wait, do I look like I'm 20? When you said history, I was like, I'll take that. I'll go for 20.
Yeah, you look good. You look good.
Work history. All right. So work history. That makes more sense. It's interesting. So I was born in Oregon and raised in Oregon. I was actually adopted. So I was adopted when I was 3 days old by a white family. And so kind of grew up in an environment where I was always other. My K through 12th grade, I was literally the only Black person. For a while, we lived in Central Oregon, and when my parents would take me out, others would touch me to see if I felt the same, either my hair or my skin. And so for me, it was really one of those things that I think kind of evolved over time. And then as I started to realize that, I didn't start to actually kind of always knew this, but I am one of those people that is not afraid to stand up and to say what I really think. If I believe in something, I will dig my heels in and say what I need to say. And I had an opportunity or a couple opportunities to work with some amazing women who I saw really advocating for others in ways that I was like, I want to be like that. And so there were some events in Oregon that really kind of were catalysts for me in saying, you know, I think I can use my voice in this space. And I can show up in a way that provides a unique perspective because of how I was raised and who I was raised with and some of my, you know, my experiences, but it also allows me to tell a story and bridge some of the gaps that might be seen. And so I saw just the opportunity to speak up and do things for others. So it wasn't necessarily one event.
One thing, right?
Yeah.
So since this topic is about diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging, we've had a couple of people kind of explain a little bit about what each of those categories mean. So based on that, I have a couple of questions for you. Number one, does the order of these acts, does that make a difference on what order these words are used in?
I really think it depends on what and where and how you're applying it. I want to add a little bit on just the definitions because I want, if I can leave anything, folks, I would say this. This is something, there's so many different definitions, but here's what I would add. Diversity is a fact. Equity is a choice. Inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome.
Okay, wait, you might want to repeat that. Somebody might have missed that. Come on, give it to me again.
One more time. So, and I would encourage you after this, think about it. Take a moment, say these things and say, what does that mean to me? You know, how does that resonate? So diversity is a fact. Equity is a choice. Inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome.
That should go in the chat.
I will get it in there.
Okay, and so now go ahead and let you continue on telling us the difference between these. How do you think how do these all connect? How are they related?
So when you think about it and you think about, there's a lot of interconnectivity between all of those things, right? And so no matter what the definition is and how we're engaging with them, I think if you're focusing on one of the areas, so let's talk about diversity. We can throw out different stats, different numbers, you know, as we're looking at that information, you know, we can always see those things, right? So those are the facts. And if you want to not lead with the facts, but you want to lead with maybe some of the choices that you could make or some of the recommendations on choices that you make, then we're talking about equity. And how do we create or how do we have an equitable environment, outcome, whatever it is that we're trying to drive? For me, inclusion is an action. So if I am sitting around a table, am I actively assessing who's at that table? What voices are being heard? Who are we including? When we're hosting events, when we're, you know, doing any of our interactions, how are we making sure that everybody has the opportunity to be there and be included? And then belonging, if we're bringing them in and people don't feel like they're supposed to be there or they're a token, then you know what's going to happen? They're not going to feel like they belong. And so then you're not, in a lot of ways, like we previously heard, leading with your heart. And so I do think that it really depends on where you're at and how you're looking at things, on if you want to lead with one as opposed to the other. But I think that each of them have such an interconnectivity and you know, they work together. And so it's a little bit hard to do one without thinking of the others.
So, you know, being a woman, I've been in a situation over the years where I've been that only person in the room, whether it was the only woman or the only woman of color or the only person of color. And there has been this silent competition, if you will, sometimes that exists among ourselves, to where when you are the first or the only, that sometimes there is a guarded experience that you have in trying to make sure that you either represent or overrepresent your position there. And sometimes that can be challenging when the second person comes into the room, if you know what I mean. And so that, because sometimes we feel like there's only room for one. So in your experience, how do we learn how to better navigate that to where we don't foster that environment, but instead that we learn to embrace that and to try to, when you have that opportunity to be in that position, to bring others in with you?
You know, it's interesting as I've gone through my career, very short career since I'm only 20, and I've interacted with others. I've really tried to approach it like as you move into leadership and you start to hire people and interact. I've watched individuals feel threatened if they either interview or hire someone that they think could move into their role. And I think that is part of it, is that there's this competition or there's this concern because you feel threatened. I have this saying on I have stickers, and I have a sticker, and it's like, it's not pie. It doesn't mean that if you get a piece, it's taking a piece away from me, right? So we need to start thinking about this, like, how do we make sure, like, I hire people because I want them to want my job and I want them to replace me. And then when they get here, I'm going to work very hard to help them grow so that ultimately they can replace me. And I think part of that is also a mind shift, right? We're not looking at coming into jobs now, staying for 30, 40 years and retiring. We're moving, the entire workforce is becoming so much more mobile that what we need to do is to say, if I'm passionate about what I'm doing and I believe in the company that I'm working for, then I want to leave it better. And so in doing that, it means that I have to bring other people into the room that will be able to carry on my voice when I leave. And so almost like a legacy. So the other thing is, though, I've definitely worked for many people that you can feel the threat. I mean, in one of my previous roles, I had a woman tell me that I would never have been able to just walk in with my hair braided, because if she hadn't been there first. And she really laid the framework for me to be able to do that. And I could feel like there was just this level of threat. And I understood that. And so I really spent the time, because I felt like, okay, I don't know how to change her thoughts other than to really get to know her and to show her that I can still be an advocate and help her as opposed to working against her. So in that moment, I knew that it would have been very much a confrontational thing at that point, because now you've got, two women of color in leadership positions in an organization that traditionally has been fairly non-diverse. So instead of, creating more of that confrontational environment, I tried to find ways to build bridges and to have us be advocates. And so I just very quietly, actively started speaking up in meetings on her behalf. She could see that I was like her fan. And that's, that's what I tried to do. Now, I don't know that will work everywhere.
I doubt there's any one formula that will work everywhere. But, you brought up something that just sparked something in my curiosity, is that when you talked about wearing braids to work, I'm reminded of the Crown Act that just recently passed in 2019. For anyone who's not familiar with that, it is to create a respectful and open world for natural hair. So we live in a world where there's been laws passed over the years, generationally, for women in particular, just to be able to vote, just to be able to get married. I mean, all kinds of things that we had to have laws that actually gave us permission to exist, to have some type of equity in the world, period. But then when we get to things like the Crown Act, where it specifically targeted a group of people that says you can wear your own hair. How do we go from that, and how do we teach other people how to embrace that and not be threatened by that? How is someone threatened by your hairstyle? So when we're having that kind of thing, and sometimes that's among one another, that's not necessarily outside people treating it can be woman to woman that these things are occurring. So when we have these instances where we are, whether it's for the job position or whether we're pointing out someone's hair is different, how do we move forward, and how do we encourage growth in that area where we include one another. Because if we're talking about diversity and inclusion, but there's, where we're doing this to ourselves, how do we kind of help to eliminate or eradicate some of that behavior?
I think we have to start with what we have in common. I mean, that's my basic answer, right? So it's so easy to point out all of our differences, but if we can start with what we have in common and build from there, I really do think it will start to move the dial. And it will start, and we need to have the conversations. We need to not be afraid to speak how it feels, or how it might be, or what the differences are. But we need to do it out of a place of, instead of it being confrontational or you're this and I'm that, it's what do we have that's in common? Where can we build, and how can we build from there? Right now, I feel like our world is one that is so much, you're here, I'm here, and we're going to point out our differences, as opposed to thinking about, okay, you know what? You might really, really, really like purple, and I might really, really, really like yellow. And they might not be anything similar, but we both love gray. So let's start with gray and then work and build from there. But if we're constantly thinking about, what isn't, then we're never going to get to what could be.
When I think about what you're saying, that's so powerful, because, the one thing we do all have in common is one day we're going to leave this earth.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
if we have not done something I don't work for a company. I'm self-employed. I have a couple of businesses that I have, including, I'm an author and publisher, and I have an insurance business, and I'm a minister. All of those things are self-funded, so to speak. You know what I mean? Those are things that I earn however I earn. There's not a company. I would hate to think that after the years that it took to build this, that when I left, that there was no one to sustain it. And so I think that if we could look at it as what you've done, if you could pass the baton to someone and make sure that they take what you have and build on it, maybe that would change our perspective or change our interaction with one another. What are your thoughts on that as far as legacy building? Because if we hold everything so tightly that we don't want to share our information, we don't want to share our resources, and we feel that you're competing, like I know last year feels like just last week, but it was really 5 years ago. Time is going by very, very quickly. So how do we make sure that we create legacies that unite us together instead of dividing us?
Right. United we stand, divided we fall, right? I mean, and it's true. The legacies, if you think about, and we look at history, where do we ever see somebody that was really trying to move something forward feel threatened? Because somebody else was trying to help them. Instead, they brought them into and under the tent and said, hey, you know what? The more voices we have working on this, the better we are. And that's where you start to be able to truly leave a legacy and truly make changes that are not just at the symptom level, but at the root level. And I think one of the things that we need to do is to also find ways to bring those under the tent that might not have had the opportunity to advocate and use their voices, but want to be there. I mean, when you look back at some of the marches and some of that, it wasn't just Black and brown people that were marching. There was a lot of us. And so we need to make sure that we are creating spaces, no matter where we're at, for others that are passionate about this to help, and to not point out, oh, but you don't understand this or you don't get this, but to find ways to say, you know what? I appreciate hearing your voice, and I would love to be able to, one, understand your point of view and share mine with you. And then let's figure out a way to leave that lasting legacy.
So now, since this is a topic specific to women, and we're talking about women's history, one of the commonalities that I see in a lot of successful women now is that they're single. Statistic tells us now that more, especially women of color, are accelerating at a much higher rate and really outperforming even other women of other ethnicities as far as becoming college educated, especially when you talk about the graduate level, are higher. But those women are also choosing that, or not even choosing that, but they're living a life that somehow is alienating them from being able to get married, have children, that puts them in a different, while they're excelling over here, they're not necessarily building their family legacy over here. And again, not by choice. I happen to know and am one of the women. I am single and I don't have children. And to where I know a lot of women who are in the same category. how do we encourage these younger people now that we want them to get educations without sacrificing having to have a family? Or do we have to consider other options as far as dating men that may not be men of African descent? How do you address those issues when they're presented to you?
First off, I have 2 children. I'm more than willing to share one of my boys with you, specifically the younger one that's in college, because paying for any kind of college education.
You're too kind.
I'm willing to co-parent. I'm more than willing to co-parent. No, in all seriousness, I think it's an important thing to think about, historically what has happened within specifically the Black community, and, how we talk about our Black men and how they, we don't even realize it. But when you hear stories, you watch the news, we're inundated with it on how, our men are described. It does change in some ways, the way that our brains perceive them. So I think it's important to remember that, some of this can be unconscious bias, even that we as women don't even realize that we have about our own community. And for one, I think having that awareness is important. And then 2, I do think, having been and been in my career, but also watched the way that the world seems to be changing from just an overall standpoint of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable, I'm starting to see some, I think, positive changes around support of families, family planning, and having children and still being able to move up in your career. I think it's one of those things that we have to be willing and able to talk about from an organizational standpoint, but also as women who have maybe passed the point of being able to have children, to talk to those beneath us, to mentor them, to explain to them, not only like I can mentor them on, what it was like to be a single mom in the military with a child that had leukemia.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were in Germany. Were you in Germany as well?
I was in Germany, so living overseas with them. I mean, so if we tell our stories and, you see others who have done it and others who might have made that decision and now are looking back saying, I wish I'd made a different one. I think the power of story and the power of communicating those stories is so incredibly important.
It is.
And really something that I think is key. So yeah.
That's good information. That's good information. I feel like I have so many questions. I have a timer going here, so I'm trying to make sure I kind of stay on target. You and I had a very interesting conversation the other night on the phone, and I think we ran 30 minutes just on the freeway talking, and realized that this conversation is so vast that we can go down so many different veins. But before we run out of time, I don't want to just focus on the hardships, because I know that in doing this work, you also have had some great rewards, and you have stories of people who you've seen benefit from this. So I want to know what are some of the first, I want you to go twofold. Tell us some of the challenges that you're still having, or obstacles that you still have to face by addressing this work. And then I want you to shift gears and then tell us some of the things that are rewarding about doing this work. Why is this still important today?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, I could talk about obstacles all day long, because I know that we've talked about, and from a political environment right now, I think that there is a lot of challenge, and there's a lot of fear from specific groups that are scared of this type of work. And so it feels like you're constantly, pushing that boulder up the hill and constantly trying to, make these small incremental changes that, do you really know what you're doing, right? So to me, that would be on the side that I would say is more challenging, and those are daily things. But when I think, I do want to, I don't want to be Pollyannish, but I want to focus on, when I look back and things that to me might have seemed incredibly small in the moment when I was at work, made some meaningful change for others. There was a woman that I mentored for a while. and spent some time with her. I think it was about a little over a year, and we talked about what she wanted to do and where she wanted to go with her career. And she was in a position that I think she felt like, well, I really want to do this. She really wanted to be a counselor and be able to help brown girls actually that were at like college level moving, and helping them think about where they could go and what they could do. But she was like, I don't know really how to approach it. I don't know that I should. I'm an administrative assistant. I think this is probably all that, I'm good at this. And I'm like, you are good at this. And so we talked about that. And I said, but what if you're better at that? And she was like, I don't know how to go about it. Right. And so I started challenging her, and there were some uncomfortable moments in it. And she's now a counselor helping brown girls get into college. And so I look at that and I think I was interacting and helping one person, but now look at what she's doing. And so that when I start thinking about a legacy and the opportunities, right now I'm starting to leave more of a legacy for others. And there was a time where I stood up the whole DEI program at an organization, and it was hard. I was on the phone with one of our lawyers, and I was getting kind of yelled at my son's preschool meet and greet. And
is this our son?
Oh, our son. Yes, I'm sorry. Our son. Sorry. I'll start sending his bills your way, by the way.
I just want to know what I'm getting into.
Yeah. At our son's preschool meet and greet. And, I was having a very strong conversation with this lawyer because she didn't like some of the decisions that I had made. She felt like I was opening the organization up for risk. And that's kind of where I dug in. And I was like, nope, this is the right thing to do. Now, when I look at that and I see what it has grown into, where there are women that are now senior executives in organizations that have been given voices and that have been able to really grow their careers. And there's people of color, and there's veterans, and there's people that have, seen and unseen disabilities, all of them, that has affected all of those people. And so when I look back and I think of those things, it just makes me feel like this sense of deep satisfaction. And I also do health equity work. There's plenty I could give you on the health equity side, but
Right. I'm actually an insurance agent, so I know a little bit on that side because I write health benefits. And there are, when I look at the diverse group of women that are part of this organization, I'm inspired to know that there are groups of people that are willing to come together. We are willing to lay aside our differences and to learn from one another. I remember someone telling me back when the incident happened with George Floyd, and I'm in this particular group, and it was I'm the only African-American woman in the group, and the person called me and said that they wanted to check on me, and I said, are you calling me because I'm Black, or are you calling me because of COVID? Which one? I'm checking on you. And so where she ended up having to admit that it was both of those things. And what I started to realize that she ended up making a comment and saying something like, well, I teach my kids not to look at color. And I had to stop her and say, it's okay that they see my color. I understand that we need to see one another's differences. One of the things I get to do is within the church is I'm a missionary. When I go to China, I have no illusion that I fit in. I have no illusion that I don't stand out and that everybody doesn't recognize me being there. Matter of fact, I had a lady come up and touch me to see if the color came off, to where understanding our differences, I think rather than saying we don't see them, we have to learn to embrace them. We have to learn to respect them. Your way of what you eat, what you drink, how you wear your hair is different. But if we can learn to appreciate that, versus making it something, and you kind of touched on that earlier where you said, think about the things that we have in common versus the things that we don't have. So if you could give advice right now, what would you say is something that we could build on? Give us a couple of tools that you say, this would be a starting point. These are the areas that I think we need, that we can start with. I know you don't have the entire blueprint, but just some from your experience, what are a couple of areas that you said, if we just started here, we could make a difference?
one of the things that I think we have to do is start getting comfortable having the conversations and talking about it and being uncomfortable. I actually want to say, when you were talking about George Floyd, it's interesting. So when you said the George Floyd incident, in my brain, just so you know, so differences here in the way we think, I was like, no, the George Floyd murder, right?
Murder.
And I know he was
You're
murdered.
right. You're
and
right.
There's where like we're not willing to just speak it out and say it because
And don't minimize it.
And don't minimize it, right?
You're right.
So having the conversations and not minimizing it, but also finding respectful ways to engage and challenge each other and to, push us all to be better. So one of the things that I would say is, yes, there's probably this big, massive blueprint out there that could be built to fix everything. But everybody says, okay, that's boiling the ocean. So that's fine. Let's not try and boil the ocean. Let's each of us take a pebble and do what we can. And so if each of us can be actionable, either in our voice, our actions, or our words, and not lead with fear, but lead with those actions, I think that's what's really going to do it. So if I could leave anybody with anything, it is find your voice and your power to say something, do something. And it might not feel real comfortable in the moment, but it could make a huge change for whoever you said and did it for. And you might not even realize it at the moment. But that is really what I would encourage everybody to do, is find one way to be actionable.
So as we close, I'm going to ask you one final question, but I want to say thank you to this panel for Arthurenia Hawkins. Thank you for your contribution. Miss Cynthia, thank you. Dr. Terri, Miss Jill, and for Rosita, and even for Miss Martha, even though she didn't say anything today. Thank you all for putting this together. And Justin, even though he's our solo guy out there that is helping assist with this platform today, I want to thank you all for participating in this. And I just want to ask you, Miss Timshel, you have inspired us and you will continue to be an inspiration. So who inspires you?
Ooh, that's a good one. I can go a couple of different places here, but I think the easiest one that I will probably always, that immediately comes to front of mind, is my son. Not yours, mine. This one's the older one. Sorry. He's currently 27 years old, but he's the one that had leukemia, and
wow.
He dealt with growing up in Oregon as a Black boy living on a farm in a rural area, having already felt very different than others, and then had layered on top of that leukemia. Instead of taking that and making him, a little bit jaded, it made that boy, he was in the Army for a while as a combat medic. He's now becoming a nurse. And it really just made him into this man, and and yeah, he still worries that he's going to get cancer and die. But he also has not let that stand in his way. So he really does inspire me to do the work and to be a better person, because I see he does it every day. So.
Well, that is the perfect segue for me to end this. I want to thank you for allowing me to have this conversation with you. I don't even feel like it was an interview. I feel like it was a conversation. So let us continue to have those conversations. As you can see, women have made great strides. We've come a long way. We still have a ways to go, but I think together we can definitely make that trip a little bit easier. So at this time, I am going to turn it back over to Ms. Jill, and she's going to have it open for our Q&A session. So we'll all be on standby, and we'll turn it back over to Ms. Jill.
Can I actually call something out really quick first? I was looking at the comments, and I want to address one, because I think it's a very fair bit of feedback, which is I did not talk about the LGBTQ plus community at all. And that is, I appreciate Gypsy Tucker challenging me on that and calling it out. And I think it's super fair. It's definitely something that if you know me, you know that I'm a huge advocate and ally. And I am very much pushing for those things from a health equity standpoint and an overall equity standpoint in the organizations that I work with and in all of my interactions. But I appreciate it being called out, because you're right, I didn't use any examples from that. And so thank you for teaching me in this moment.
Thank you. Well, everyone, it's now time for some Q&A. So this has been, I am just so incredibly humbled and honored. And so I'm going to ask that everybody turn their videos on.
Mm-hmm.
If you wouldn't mind.
Perfect.
And I'll ask the questions, and only a couple were directed specifically to someone specific. And so I'll just open it up for whomever would like to answer it. And so the first one is, what are some specific ways we can continue to challenge the hypocrisy found within political and religious arenas that prevent diversity and equality for all people? It's a great question. Maybe one or two people could answer that.
I'll give a short answer to that, and that would be to speak up. I think we have to speak up and we have to show up. I think that being silent and being complacent will continue to feed into the gains that they've had in that area. The confusion and the chaos that exists right now is because a lot of people have not spoken up, even if they don't agree with something. So I think short, stand up, speak up, show up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Reverend. Did someone else want to add to that? Or would you like me to go to the next question? Okay, well, this one's for everyone. And so maybe what I can do is just call on you as I see you on the screen. I'd like to ask the ladies of the panel, what does equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging mean to them or you? And so I'm going to call you as I see you. And certainly if you don't want to answer, pass is acceptable. So Timshel.
I mean, I kind of feel like I might have already answered that a little bit, but I
leave you out.
Yeah, no, it's fair. It's fair. I would just say, I mean, I think it's understanding each of them and how it resonates and what it means and what you can do about it. So,
thank you, Reverend Vivica.
I think that everyone has a contribution. And I think that if we look at everyone and realize that everyone has something to contribute, and it doesn't have to be measured. It's not about who can give more, give what you can give, but there's some value in everyone's contribution.
Oh, thank you. Reverend Terri.
Yes, I would say, as I said earlier, that, and this is in alignment with Ms. Timshel, Dr. Timshel, she mentioned about the diversity, equity, inclusion being a fact and then ending with an outcome. And I see DEIB as a formula. Similarly, with the D as one component, the equity as one component, inclusion equaling belonging, and all of those aspects are addressed, that we will get belonging. And I do think that's what we all want. There are some acronyms that have DEIJ, and I do think that justice is important because that is a part of people feeling like they belong. We can't overlook, that piece.
Yeah, thank you. Cynthia.
Well, diversity is people coming from a different frame of mind, cultural reference, it encompasses a lot. We don't all think the same. Equity is what looks equitable for one person may not be equitable for someone else. It's meeting people where they're at, giving them what they need, equipping them to be successful, whatever that may look like. Inclusion is everybody's included, nobody's excluded. Everybody feels like they're a part of something. And then belonging definitely is, I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Arthurenia.
Well, ladies, growing up in a small town in Kentucky doing segregation, I've experienced it all. I remember being on the bus with my dad and giving up seats to the white people. I had black and white water fountains. So for me, diversity, inclusion, and equity means all of me. It means all of us. It means that we will continue to work hard and do what we have to do to make sure we still and will always belong. For me, recently I said I spent 3 years working with racial equity at the Denver Art Museum. And now when you at the art museum, you cannot be a part or be a member or be a staff there unless you finish all of that racial equity sensitivity classes. That is now basics for you to be employed there. And then there's ongoing sessions to make sure that people are listening what's going on. But we talk about diversity, everything about equity and inclusion, but some people we say are accomplices, but not really allies. And so I tell everybody, you have to be ally, not just an accomplice. So for me, it's like I say, it's all of us to continue. And now I'm looking at intergenerational equity, and we don't make sure we pass everything we've learned down to each generation. So each generation knows what we are passing down, and it'll be always strong. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Rosita. Oh, Rosita, can you, I just need you to unmute.
I agree with most of the comments that were shared, but I think as an educator and someone of my age, I think that leading by example also is very important. And you don't have to be in a professional situation where that is your job, but to be able to do that in your everyday life with the people you meet, the people you speak to, responding to questions and what have you is very important. So we can each represent and live by those values, even if we're not working in that area.
Thank you, Rosita. Okay, I think this next question is interesting, and you can approach it from each of your respective backgrounds, which differ a little bit. So it says, please discuss DEI or DEIB using action verbs to demonstrate the meaning. So for example, how is diversity achieved? How does inclusion occur? And so would someone like to start that conversation?
I can go. I mean, I don't want to take up too much of the mic here, but I mean, when I think about it, it's by building. So if I was to think about action verbs I would use stuff like build. You want to build something, you want to create something, you want to partner with individuals, you want to seek to understand, you want to use your voice, your position, your opportunities. So all of those are ones that I would say I would use if I were to think about ways that I would use it or what I would do.
Thank you. Someone want to add to that?
Yeah, I think for me that action should always be preceded with contemplation. And I feel like contemplation asks some questions. And so in my mind, I have a set of questions that I'm asking. One being diversity asks who is in the room. Equity asks who is trying to get into the room but can't, and what are the barriers? Inclusion asks, has everyone's ideas been heard, respected, and understood? And belonging asks, is everyone feeling valued through positive connections with others and able to bring their authentic self into the space, whether it be a classroom or an office? So I usually start with questions before actions.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. All right, so this next question, again, helping people add to their tool belt, so important. And so this next question asks, since so many of the spaces that implement DEIB, so I come from rural, it's DEIAB, so DEIB feels like a tongue twister, so I apologize. DEIB offices are corporate, higher education, etc., and the relationship piece is more often than not transactional. How do we move the relationship piece from transactional to transformational? The great one. Who'd like to answer that?
I feel like I'm in the corporate setting, and so I'm going out again.
Yes.
I'm sorry, y'all. I feel like this is one that I think it's something that I deal with on a daily basis, right? As a leader who's trying to drive these things. I mean, I was on a call yesterday, and we were talking about something for our employees, and we were going to do a quiet week, and they wanted to do it during when one of our states had spring break. And the majority of our employees are in that state, we weren't taking into account individuals that might not have children, individuals that lived in other states. And there was a multitude of things. And so, and I challenged that, and it was pushed back and said, well, where are the majority of our employees? And I said, that doesn't matter. When we're thinking about diversity, and we're thinking about honoring each individual as they are, as the N of one, whether that be in their experiences as an employee, their healthcare, or other things, we have to get out of looking at it from an overall numbers standpoint and think about it from an individual outcome and experience standpoint. And so really that is what I try and center the conversations around. And also centering the conversations around, if we're only trying to, take care of the masses, then or what feels comfortable for the individuals in the room. A lot of times the individuals in the room don't reflect the diversity that we really need to be thinking about. And so going back to what is each individual's experience going to be? And then how do we look at making potential changes or addressing it in a way that is going to honor each individual's experience as opposed to the masses, which gets really hard from a corporate standpoint, especially when you're looking at outcomes, financials, and those types of things. So it's a balance, and know that, I know I'm not going to win every one of the times that I try and challenge and battle, but I also know when to really dig my heels in, because I'm like, nope, this one I'm not going to come off of. And then there's others where I'm like, all right, I've said what I needed to say. I'll let it go. I'm not going to be angry or feel like it was, nobody wants to listen to me. It's just, you can't win all of them.
Thank you, Timshel. Okay. We have someone in our audience who had her hand up, Gail Rogers. And so, Gail, I'm going to ask for you to unmute, and you can ask your question. And
I was listening to all the conversations, and I really, the last one before Ms. Tarbet spoke, and I agree with her 100% on how it's achieved. But unfortunately, what happens a lot, at least what I see, is I'm retired now. And before I retired, we were just starting in business to really come to grips with that diversity aspect. But the different organizations that I deal with, especially one in particular, they have a hard time with understanding what diversity means. And they base it on simply color, and it's so much more than color, and I can't get them to see that it's a broad aspect. It's not just about color, and they don't actually include everyone. They're I guess what they are, they're a legacy type organization with a bunch of people who've been doing it one way for so long that they can't get out of their comfort zone to embrace something else. So in those instances like that, it's really difficult to try and get them to understand of what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging means, because no matter how much you explain it to them, they cannot come to grips with it. So when you have an organization like that, how do you get them to really understand what it is that you're trying to say to them and how it is that they are making you feel, which they don't get that either?
I think that there's, there's a couple of different things that I would recommend. One is creating, outside of like those individual interactions, creating a definition framework, right? So if you can start with definitions and ensure that they understand and that they have some input into what those definitions are as the framework is being developed, I would recommend that. I also think that there's a lot of different opportunities. You know, a lot of times, having been in healthcare and specifically health insurance, it is not a diverse slate of senior leadership. I will say that. And so one of the things that has been very beneficial is to have individuals go through and take either the Harvard unconscious bias training or, you know, other things like that, so individuals can understand where they're showing up and how it might be that they don't even realize it. But it really does start with having strong definitions and then using those definitions as you are interacting and training. And remember, it's like the power of what, 5? And sometimes in these instances, it feels like it's more like the power of 500 of continually bringing those definitions back and using them in multiple ways as you're doing the interactions. And then data. There's so much data out there now. I mean, yes, 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't see it as much, but you can go to the Women in Workplace survey. You can, you know, look at so many, you know, SHRM's got information. But when you start to look at all of the different resources,
Timshel, I greatly apologize. Amazing question. Ladies and gentlemen, but we're coming to a close to our program. The Zoom will be cutting off shortly. Thank everyone for their time. It's been engaging. I thank you all for attending this webinar. We hope that you found something to inspire you to be an advocate. We are sending out the link in about a week to the webinar, so you will receive that. Please honor Black History Month and Women's History Month. And then also, we want to say, remember to keep moving forward and that we all rise when others rise. Thank you for your time. Have a great one. Bye-bye now.
Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?
Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women at the North all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place, and ain't I a woman?
Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?
Look at me, look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me, and ain't I a woman?
Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?
I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well, and ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most sold off to slavery, and when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me, and ain't I a woman?
Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?
Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? Intellect. That's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in black there, he says, women can't have as much rights as men 'cause Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough